Kool-Aid. It was the only drink for me, and it's the only one for my child.
Washes away your gray and washes in your own natural color.
Do you ever think about those unforgettable things from the 1980s? The ones that were too good to lose but somehow slipped away? These moments, styles, and gadgets shaped our days, filled our homes, and gave the decade its soul. Why do the best parts of an era always fade the fastest? You knew it was going to be a good day when the couch cushions came off. Not for cleaning, not because someone spilled Kool-Aid. No, we were building forts. Those big, square cushions became walls. The couch back turned into a rooftop. And blankets? That was your roofing material, tied off with books and tucked into seat cracks like you were training to be an architect. There was no blueprint, no real reason. Just the joy of crawling inside your new headquarters with a flashlight, a comic book, and maybe your younger sibling banned from entry. It smelled like dust and family. It felt like your own secret world. And if it collapsed, you built it again, better this time. Parents did not stop you. They might grumble, but they understood the mission. In a world before tablets and phones, couch fort engineering was a full-body activity. It sparked imagination. It taught patience. And let's be real, it gave them a quiet 5 minutes while you were off plotting fort defense strategy with a stuffed bear and a bowl of dry cereal. Forts made the house feel different, magical. And even though the cushions always went back, the memory never left. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then, it was gourmet. You took a slice of Bolognia, the kind that came in a stack with red plastic around the edges, and tossed it in the microwave. No plate, no napkin, just vibes. You hit the button and waited until the meat started to curl up like a little pink bowl, edges crackling, center sizzling. That was when you knew it was done. It smelled kind of awful, but also kind of amazing. And somehow, it tasted like a salty, crispy miracle. Some kids added mustard. Others slapped it between 2 slices of white bread. A few went rogue and ate it straight like it was a personal achievement. This was not mom's dinner. This was survival snack creativity at its peak. Maybe the microwave was only a few years old. Maybe you were not supposed to be using it without supervision. But that never stopped you. The curling edges were the best part, like bacon, but cheaper. Crunchy and hot and weirdly comforting. It was not just Bolognia. It was a symbol of how kids in the 1980s made something out of anything. And yes, we would absolutely eat it again. Kool-Aid was the drink of champions and the broke. That tiny packet of powdered joy could turn a jug of water into magic. The instructions said to add a full cup of sugar, but a lot of households just didn't. Maybe it was to save money. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone said, "That is too much sugar," and halved it forever. What you got was a tart, borderline sour beverage that burned a little on the way down. Your lips puckered, your teeth buzzed, and you loved it anyway. You swirled it with a wooden spoon in an old plastic pitcher that was probably stained from years of grape and cherry. Sometimes the sugar never dissolved, so the last few sips had a crunch. If you were lucky, your mom let you pour it into an ice cube tray with toothpicks and freeze it. Homemade popsicles that tasted like vaguely sweet battery acid. But they were yours. And every summer day had that flavor hanging in the air. Cheap, bright, unforgettable. Kool-Aid with half the sugar was not a mistake. It was a lifestyle. And no drink since has matched that perfect blend of effort, expectation, and improvised satisfaction. Before the remote control became king, the youngest child in the house was the remote. You would be sitting on the floor halfway through a bowl of cereal when you heard it. Change the channel. You knew what that meant. No arguments, no delay. Get up, walk over, and twist the dial on the giant wood-paneled television set. Sometimes the knob was missing. Sometimes you had to use pliers. Sometimes you just smacked the side of the TV until the picture stopped rolling. It was not just about flipping channels. You had to adjust volume, track down static, and fine-tune the antenna until it picked up channel 5 just right. If the weather was bad, good luck. You might end up holding the antenna in place with one hand and standing on one foot while everyone else watched. No one said thank you. But that was the job. It built character, or maybe just calluses from turning a stiff dial over and over again. But there is something kind of sweet about it now. Being the remote meant you were part of the moment, part of the household rhythm. Today, we have voice controls and streaming menus. But nothing beats hearing Channel 5 and knowing you had a job to do. Halloween used to be made out of whatever you had in the kitchen junk drawer. There were no pre-packaged superhero suits or light-up wigs with batteries. You had a paper bag, you had a black marker, boom, you were a robot or a pumpkin or a ghost if someone was willing to sacrifice an old sheet. Sometimes the costume fell apart halfway down the block. Sometimes the eye holes were too high. And sometimes you got mistaken for a grocery sack. But it did not matter. You were out there with a pillowcase in one hand and a flashlight in the other, trying to get as much candy as your legs could carry. The homemade costumes had heart. They were funny. They were weird. And they always came with duct tape, safety pins, and a parent promising, "No one will notice." You did not care about accuracy. You cared about the candy haul. If you made it home with more than 3 chocolate bars and without sweating through your face paint, you won. Now kids have YouTube tutorials and custom order everything. But back then, a paper bag and a dream were all you needed. Barbie was the dream, but not every kid got the real thing. Enter fashion doll. You know the one. Same shape, same long blonde hair, but her shoes did not fit, her knees did not bend, and her outfit was different. The box usually just said doll or princess girl. And if you twisted her head too far, it stayed sideways. But here's the thing. You still loved her. She rode in the Barbie Corvette, slept in the dream house, and wore handmade outfits from your cousin's old socks. She got married to Ken, or maybe G.I. Joe, depending on who was available. Her hair got brushed until it frizzed, her arms got chewed on, and her name changed weekly. Sure, the plastic smelled funny, and yes, her legs were harder than wood, but she did the job. She was your doll. And sometimes that was even better than the real thing. Summer in the 1980s did not come with central air. It came with box fans, giant, clunky rectangles shoved into windows or perched on folding chairs. They had one setting: loud. You would press your face close and talk into it like a robot. Then flip it around and hope it sucked out the heat. Sometimes it just blew hot air at you, but it was better than nothing. You would rotate it between rooms like a sacred relic. Whoever got the fan that night was the chosen one. Everyone else just sweated it out under a single top sheet, praying for a breeze. The sound of the blades was the soundtrack of summer, a low hum that meant someone was trying their best to cool the house with whatever they had. Today, we have smart thermostats and ceiling fans with remotes. But there is something deeply nostalgic about the window fan. Its power was psychological more than anything. It gave you the idea of relief, and sometimes that was enough. Winter nights hit different when only one room had heat. You would drag the sleeping bags, extra blankets, and maybe even a mattress into the living room, huddling around the gas heater like it was a campfire. It was not glamorous. It was necessary. There was condensation on the windows. Your breath showed in the hallway. And if you had to go to the bathroom at night, it felt like walking through the Arctic. But still, it was kind of special. You watched TV until it cut to static. You played cards on the floor with your siblings. Someone always snored, but no one complained. That heater, old, loud, maybe a little dangerous, was the heart of the home during those cold months. You figured out how to layer socks, how to sleep 3 deep under a quilt, and how to make it work. And even though it was rough, you kind of miss it now, because it meant everyone was in the same place together. Warmth by proximity. And that kind of closeness is harder to find these days. You know exactly what I am talking about. That off-brand tub of ice cream that your parents bought when the name brand stuff was too expensive. You would get all excited, open the lid, and immediately realize something was off. The texture? Rock solid. The flavor? Vaguely sweet. The experience? A test of patience. You had to leave it on the counter for 15 minutes just to get a spoon in. Once you did, it came out in chunks. Cold, grainy, semi-milky chunks. But still, it was ice cream. Kind of. You would drench it in chocolate syrup or crumble cookies over the top just to give it some personality. The good flavors ran out fast. You were always left with vanilla, and that meant icy, bland, and suspiciously freezer-burned. But none of it went to waste. You were a kid, and cold dessert was cold dessert. Somehow, even the worst version still felt like a win. Now, ice cream has ribbons, swirls, and $10 price tags. But that block of knockoff vanilla? That was a staple of childhood summers. And we ate it like it was gold. You did not grow up with cereal boxes. You grew up with cereal bags. Giant, plastic, zip-top sacks that sat in the pantry like oversized pillows. The mascot? Some weird cartoon animal you had never seen on television. The name? Something like Toasty Circles or Choco Flakes Crunch. You knew it was not the real thing, but it was close enough. You poured it into the same bowl, added the same milk, and tried not to notice that it went soggy a lot faster. Sometimes the colors were off, sometimes the flavor was almost right. But when you are hungry at 7 a.m. and the school bus is 5 minutes away, you are not picky. You scarfed it down while cartoons played in the background, wiping milk off your chin as you ran out the door. It was never about the brand. It was about the routine, the comfort, the crunch, and honestly, some of those off-brand cereals? Pretty unbeatable. They just needed better PR. You never met them, but you wore their clothes. Some cousin 3 towns over outgrew a stack of shirts, and suddenly you had a whole new wardrobe. The box would show up unceremoniously, a big brown thing with no return address and a smell like attic and dryer sheets. Inside, denim overalls, a pair of oddly stiff sneakers, and at least one t-shirt that said something like Junior Lifeguard, even though you had never been near a beach. None of it fit quite right. Some sleeves too long, some pants too short. But you wore it all like it was brand new, because in a way it was new to you. You did not get to pick colors or styles. You just hoped there were no itchy tags and that nothing said "Girls Rock" if you were a boy. Sometimes the hand-me-downs came from siblings, but the cousin box was different. It had mystery, history, and occasionally a pair of jeans with your future written in grass stains. You made it work. Safety pins, rolled cuffs, layered sweatshirts, all part of the process. And when you finally outgrew it, off it went to someone else's basement. Hand-me-downs were not just clothes. They were stories passed down through staticky fabric and permanent marker name tags. There was no such thing as proper gear for winter. You just put on everything you had. 1 pair of jeans over pajama pants, 3 sweaters layered like armor, gloves under mittens, a hat over a hood. You walked out of the house rustling like a trash bag. You could not bend your arms. Breathing was optional. But you were warm. At least, mostly. Snow would still sneak in through the gap between your boots and the elastic of your sweatpants, but that was just part of the experience. The real win was staying outside long enough to feel your eyebrows freeze. You built forts, threw snowballs, and refused to come in, even when you could not feel your face. Everyone looked ridiculous. Everyone was red-faced and smiling, and everyone knew the secret. Layers were survival. You did not need fancy snow gear or a coat that cost $200. You needed hand-me-down hoodies, a scarf made by your aunt, and maybe a garbage bag for sledding. Winters were cold, but they were full. And so were you, of hot chocolate, icicle breath, and about 14 pounds of clothing. Tube socks were not optional. They were standard issue. You pulled them up high, just under your knees, no matter the temperature or occasion. They were white, thick, and usually had 2 colored stripes across the top like racing flags for your legs. You wore them with shorts, you wore them with sneakers, and you definitely wore them with those plastic sandals that made no sense. It did not matter. That was the look. Your calves were wrapped in cotton armor, and you felt like an athlete just walking to the mailbox. If your socks sagged, you fixed them. If they had holes, you flipped them to the other foot. Nobody questioned it. Tube socks were part of the uniform. For gym class, for Saturdays, for school pictures. You knew which pairs were the good ones by how tightly they hugged your shin. Some had the brand name barely visible near the toe, faded from years in the wash. Others had mystery stains that somehow never went away. But all of them were dependable. They were socks you could live in. And honestly, they made you feel like you were going somewhere, even if it was just to the living room. Waterproof boots? Never heard of them. What you had were sneakers, 2 pairs of socks, and a crinkly old bread bag stuffed between. You would slide your foot into that bag like it was high-tech outdoor gear. It rustled, it slipped, but it kind of worked. Your shoes stayed mostly dry, or at least dry enough to avoid frostbite. Plus, it gave your mom peace of mind, and something to do with all those empty Wonder Bread bags. You might have looked ridiculous. You definitely sounded ridiculous. But it was a common trick in homes where practicality beat out fashion every time. And if you were lucky, your bag had little cartoon characters on it. Something about snow gear made from sandwich packaging just felt right in the 1980s. No one made a fuss. It was just part of getting ready to play outside. Snow meant layering up with whatever materials the kitchen and hallway closet could spare. Today, kids have boots with zippers, lining, and custom grip soles. Back then, you had a plastic bag and some determination. And somehow, it was enough. That couch had been through it. Spilled drinks, wrestling matches, a cat that saw it as its personal jungle gym, and when the vinyl cracked or the fabric tore, out came the duct tape. It was silver, shiny, stuck like a dream, and it never matched anything, but it saved the couch, one strip at a time. First, it was just a little patch on the armrest, then the corner. Then the whole middle cushion started looking like a race car hood. You could tell a lot about a household by how much duct tape was holding the furniture together. But nobody minded. It still functioned. You could still sit, eat, watch TV, and fall asleep during Saturday morning cartoons. That couch was part of the family. And the duct tape? Just another character. It squeaked when you moved. It peeled in the summer. And it might take some skin with it if you wore shorts. But it kept going. Like everything else in the 1980s, it was about making it work, even if it was ugly. Fashion in the 1980s did not whisper, it shouted. And nothing screamed louder than bright yellow or electric orange pants. These were not subtle. They were neon. You could see them from a block away. They clashed with everything. And you wore them like they were designer. Paired with tube socks, a graphic tee, and maybe a sweatband if you were feeling sporty, these pants were part of the loud, unapologetic joy of the decade. You were not trying to blend in. You were trying to exist, to be bold, even if you were just riding your bike around the cul-de-sac. They made you feel fast, even when you were just walking. They had presence, like a human highlighter. They made for the loudest laundry load in history. They said, "I am here," without saying a word. And somehow, no one ever questioned it. Some had elastic waistbands. Others had belt loops and strange pleats. A few even made that swishy noise when you walked, but all of them made a statement. Looking back, it is hard to believe we walked around dressed like traffic cones and somehow pulled it off. But in a decade full of flash and flare, orange pants fit right in. And for a moment, they made you feel like the main character in your own sitcom. In every 1980s refrigerator, there was at least one cool whip tub pretending to be Tupperware. You would open it, expecting dessert, and get smacked in the face with leftover spaghetti, or beans, or meatloaf. The disappointment was real, the deception legendary. But the system worked. Cool whip tubs were free storage, durable, stackable, and absolutely immune to being thrown away. Your mom saved every one of them. She also used margarine tubs, sherbet containers, and anything else that came with a lid. You opened the lid slowly, half expecting dessert and half bracing for something savory. These containers became legendary in every family, reused for years, sometimes decades. It was not unusual to find a Cool Whip tub inside a cooler at a picnic filled with deviled eggs or potato salad. And when one cracked, that was a real moment of loss. You could build a whole storage empire from leftovers alone. There was no shame in it. If anything, it was resourceful. Sometimes they even made it into your school lunch. Soup in a butter container, salad in a yogurt cup. As long as it had a lid, it had a purpose. Now we have color-coded meal prep sets with airtight seals. But back then, it was whatever you could wash and reuse. Cool Whip was just the beginning. The real Tupperware was hiding in plain sight. Before tablets, we had tape and scissors and toilet paper rolls that became everything. You could make a pair of binoculars, a mini spaceship, or a castle turret with just a little imagination. One roll and a paper clip, instant microphone, 2 rolls and a string. Working walkie-talkie, sort of. Add crayons and stickers and you had art. It was messy and it was perfect. Nothing you made was ever structurally sound, but it was yours. The joy was not in the finished product, it was in the process. The glue never stuck quite right, and the glitter was permanent. But somehow, your crafts still felt like masterpieces. The joy came from creating, not buying. You raided the trash for supplies, egg cartons, cereal boxes, milk jugs. Anything with a cool shape could become part of your build. Parents encouraged it, mostly because it was free and kept you quiet. You would sit at the kitchen table for hours, wrapped in a cloud of glue stick and dried marker scent, crafting your next masterpiece. It might fall apart in a day, but that was part of the charm. You made it, and you would make another one tomorrow. You were not picky. Whatever bottle your mom grabbed, that was your shampoo. Sometimes it was a brand name. Sometimes it was a generic bottle with a missing label and a flip-top cap that never closed right. It smelled vaguely floral, or like chemicals, sometimes both. And it left your hair squeaky, literally. The suds were enormous. The rinse took forever. And if it got in your eyes, game over. There was no mercy. You learned how to shield your eyes with your hands and wince through the burn. You prayed for the shampoo to run out so the next bottle might be gentler. You never knew what hydration or damage repair meant. You just hoped it would not leave your scalp tingling in a bad way. There were no tear-free guarantees, just a wet towel to your face and the instruction to tough it out. You learned fast, learned to tilt your head just right, learned which bottles stung less, and even though it was probably the cheapest thing on the shelf, it got the job done. Your hair was clean, and that was enough. Now every shampoo promises nourishment, volume, shine, and spa-like results. But back then, it just had to bubble up and not smell like wet dog. Plastic sandwich bags were not disposable. They were forever. You used one for your peanut butter and jelly on Monday, rinsed it out at night, and let it dry upside down on the counter. Tuesday, same bag. Wednesday, still going strong. By Friday, it was a little cloudy, maybe stained with grape jelly, but still functional. Your mom would just say, "It's fine." And it was. The zipper seal wore out eventually, but not before at least a week of service, sometimes 2. It saved money, it saved plastic, and it taught you that not everything needs to be thrown away after one use. Drying them upside down was an art. They sat on wooden spoons or forks in the dish rack like weird plastic flowers. You could always tell which bags were for sandwiches and which were demoted to holding carrots or pretzels. Eventually, one bag became the cheese bag and stayed that way for months. And you knew better than to throw one out without permission. The bag might be crinkled and warped from a hot dishwasher cycle, but it still held your chips, still kept your sandwich from getting squished in your lunchbox. Today, we have reusable silicone pouches and glass containers. But back then, it was a simple plastic bag, washed and reused until it begged for retirement. And honestly, it worked. If the picture on the television started to get fuzzy in the 1980s, you did not call for help. You called for a coat hanger. That was the universal fix. The V-shaped wire hanger, bent into an L or whatever shape your dad swore worked last time, got jammed into the back of the TV like a magic wand for signal. It was not elegant, it was not stable, but it got the job done, eventually. You would hold it, twist it, and maybe even stick a ball of tinfoil on the end to boost the reception, as if that actually did anything. And if it still did not work, you had to stand in just the right position, one arm raised like a lightning rod, until someone shouted from the couch, "Right there! Do not move!" Some poor soul became a human antenna for half the movie. The picture would still roll, or flicker, But if you could get just enough of the screen visible to see what was going on in Knight Rider or the A-Team, it was good enough. No one complained. Not really. Everyone was just glad the TV worked at all. And when the signal dropped again, out came the hanger. Some people got creative, using forks, soda cans, even metal spoons. But the hanger was the gold standard. It was always in reach, always dependable, and always slightly bent from the last time someone got frustrated and jammed it too far. Today, everything is high definition and streaming. But back then, the clearest image came from a slightly corroded wire hanger and sheer determination. Shoes in the 1980s were not replaced. They were repaired. And sometimes that repair meant slipping a piece of cereal box cardboard into the bottom because the sole had worn straight through. That was not unusual. That was normal. You would sit on the edge of the tub with your foot on a towel, tracing the shape of your foot onto whatever cardboard was lying around. A cornflakes box, the back of a notebook, maybe even last week's TV guide cover. Cut it out with blunt scissors, shove it in, and suddenly your shoe was fixed. No one questioned it. No one judged it. Everyone did it. The cardboard would wear out fast, especially if it rained. Then it turned into soggy mush that stuck to your socks and disintegrated by lunchtime. But you still wore those shoes because they still looked okay from the outside. Maybe the toe was a little scuffed, maybe the heel flapped when you walked, but they got you to school and back, and in most households, that was good enough. New shoes were a luxury. You got them at the start of the school year, and that was supposed to last. So if they started falling apart in February, you improvised. You made it work. Sometimes you even doubled up, 2 layers of cardboard, or even some newspaper in between for cushion. It was not comfortable, but it was functional, and it taught you something. How to stretch what you had, how to keep things going a little longer, and how to walk like you meant it, even with cardboard under your heel. When your jeans tore at the knees, and they always did, there was no going to the mall for a new pair. You went to the drawer where the iron-on patches lived. Usually denim-colored, sometimes weirdly off-shade, they came in a paper sleeve and felt stiff like cardboard. You peeled them out, lined them up with the hole, and broke out the iron. No sewing, no needle and thread, just heat, pressure, and hope. The process was simple. Iron until the glue melted, hold it down, and try not to burn yourself. Sometimes it stuck. Sometimes it bubbled. Sometimes it peeled up after one wash and left a sticky residue that clung to everything. But for a brief, shining moment, your jeans looked like they had been fixed. They were good jeans again. You could wear them to school, climb a fence, fall off a bike, and no one could see your skin poking through the denim. The patches never matched perfectly. The fabric was too dark, too light, too obvious. But nobody cared. Having patched jeans was a badge of real life. It said, "I play hard." It said, "I am not afraid to slide down a gravel driveway." And in a weird way, it felt kind of cool, like armor for your legs. Now, distressed jeans come pre-ripped and cost 3 times more. Back then, we patched them ourselves. And every time that iron sizzled, it felt like giving something a second life. Christmas morning was not complete until someone shouted, "Save the paper." You would be halfway through ripping open a gift, and suddenly your mom or grandma would stop you mid-tier to carefully unfold the wrapping. The paper was too pretty, too thick, or too expensive to just throw away. So it got folded, smoothed, and stacked for next year. Some even rolled it around cardboard tubes or reused the exact same sheet with the same tape marks and creases. You learned how to unwrap presents like a surgeon, carefully sliding your fingers under the tape, peeling it back like it was tissue paper from a museum exhibit. Gift bags? Not common. Every package was a wrapped box, and every ribbon was curled with scissors and stored in a bag labeled bows. It was not about being frugal, it was about being prepared. The good wrapping paper was too valuable to waste. The foil ones, the ones with little embossed snowflakes or glitter stars, that stuff was currency in a house with a budget. You recognized paper from previous years. "Oh, I remember this one." It was on your gift last Christmas. It became a tradition, a story. Today, everything gets ripped open in 5 seconds and tossed in the trash. But back then, we treated wrapping paper like heirlooms, because when you do not have much, you make every piece count, even the scraps. And the funny thing is, it still looked just as magical the second time around. Nothing said treat night like a frozen meal in a shiny metal tray. The tray was divided like a treasure map. Main course here, side dish there, and dessert tucked into its own little compartment like a secret reward. You popped it into the oven, no microwaves back then, and waited for it to bubble and hiss. You could hear it before you smelled it. And once it was done, the tray came out hotter than the sun. But it was perfect, because that tray meant something. It meant you got to eat in the living room, on a folding tray table, in front of the TV, watching reruns of Knight Rider or The Jeffersons while poking a fork into overcooked peas and a brownie that burned on the edges and stayed raw in the middle. You did not question the quality. You did not complain about the mashed potatoes being powdered or the Salisbury steak tasting like mystery meat. It was hot, it was salty, it was yours. And for that one night, it felt like luxury. Sometimes the corn and gravy would mix. Sometimes the macaroni had a weird crust. But that divided tray kept everything in its place, neat, tidy, and strangely satisfying. Today, frozen meals come in plastic. They get soggy. They steam weird. But that old-school metal tray? That was dinner with structure, dinner with ceremony. And honestly, it tasted better because you knew it was rare, something special. A tiny moment carved out of chaos, one foil-wrapped section at a time. The bell rang. You got home, threw your backpack down, and turned on the television. That was the ritual. After-school specials hit different. Sometimes it was cheesy, sometimes it was deep, but you watched it all. And then came Friday night. TGIF, a lineup of shows that felt like family. You had your favorites. Maybe it was the goofy neighbor, maybe the catchphrase. You knew when to laugh, when to cry, when to yell at the screen. Dinner was timed around the first show. Everyone sat in the living room, legs crossed, snacks in hand. It felt like the whole country was watching with you. No streaming, no skipping intros. You saw the same commercial break 5 times and still loved it. Those nights felt like events, like something bigger than just watching television. The credits rolled, and it felt like you had just been part of something, even if it was just from your couch. These shows were more than entertainment. They were a break from everything else. School, homework, drama. They reminded you the week was over. You made it. And for the next 2 hours, you could laugh, breathe, and just be a kid. You remember this. The hustle was not just a dance. It was a declaration that you were alive, stylish, and could move like liquid. It slid into clubs and wedding receptions alike. And if you were not doing it, you were watching it, waiting to learn. Disco brought the music, but the hustle gave it shape. It had rhythm, it had flash, and it had rules, but none too strict. It started in New York clubs, a mix of Latin footwork and soul flair, and spread like fire across the country. Couples spun and dipped with practiced ease, while groups snapped their fingers in unison, making ordinary people feel like stars. You could be shy all week and still own the room the second that beat dropped. The hustle made it okay to be dramatic, stylish, and totally unfiltered. For a while, the hustle was everywhere, on television shows, in gym class, even in living rooms, where kids tried it on shag carpeting and slid into coffee tables. The song told you to do it, and you did. Now it lives in nostalgic party playlists and throwback dance nights. But back then, it was the pulse of the weekend. The hustle taught a generation how to move together, even when the world outside felt disjointed. Why did a few steps and a catchy beat make us feel so connected, even if only for 3 minutes? Before Nintendo, video games were gasping for breath. After Nintendo, they were alive again. It was 1985 when the Nintendo Entertainment System hit American shelves and changed living rooms forever. The gray and red console was a Trojan horse, simple in design but hiding worlds inside. Suddenly, you were not just a kid. You were Mario, leaping through pipes to save the princess. You were Link, braving dungeons for the Triforce. You were part of something massive. Nintendo did not just bring games. It brought heroes. It brought soundtracks you could hum in your sleep and cheat codes whispered like secret spells. The controller became an extension of your hand. Blowing into cartridges felt like a ritual, and beating a level felt like beating life itself. For many, Nintendo was not a toy. It was a friend, a daily escape, a safe place to fail and try again. Families gathered around the screen, arguing over whose turn it was. Siblings became rivals, parents got curious, and the living room was never the same again. With every beep and pixel, Nintendo gave us wonder, and it never asked for anything more than time and imagination. Micronauts were not household names like G.I. Joe or Star Wars toys, but for the kids who loved them, they were everything. Small, strange, and endlessly customizable, Micronauts were the science fiction building blocks of your imagination. Released in the late 1970s, they came with magnetic limbs, clear plastic torsos, interchangeable armor, and ships you could take apart and reconfigure 100 different ways. There was no show at first, no comic book, just you and your mind filling in the gaps. What planet did they come from? What powers did they have? It did not matter. You decided. The Micronauts were yours. One day they were heroes. The next, they were villains. Their limbs could pop off. Their vehicles turned into bases, walkers, or weapons. They were not just action figures. They were tools for storytelling. And every kid who had a handful knew the thrill of inventing whole galaxies on the living room floor. While other toys had scripts, Micronauts had potential. They invited you to build the adventure, not just follow it. They were futuristic, weird, and wild, and that made them unforgettable. In a time before everything came with instructions, Micronauts handed you the pieces and whispered, "Go create." Back in the 1970s, you were not really expressing yourself unless you were doing it through a weird t-shirt. The weirder, the better. I am with stupid and a big arrow? Iconic. Disco sucks in big block letters? Rebellious. Have a nice day with a terrifying smiley face? Totally normal. These shirts were not just clothes, they were statements. Statements that often made no sense but made people laugh anyway. Some featured cartoon frogs drinking beer. Others had random phrases like, "Instant human, just add coffee." Nobody questioned it. In fact, the less it made sense, the more people wanted one. Tie-dye? Check. Iron-on graphics? Even better. You could walk into a mall and walk out looking like a walking billboard for nonsense. Parents wore them. Teenagers wore them. Even toddlers wore shirts that said things like, "Here comes trouble," as if chaos was hereditary. These shirts let you skip small talk. You just showed up and let your chest do the talking. Whether you were sarcastic, grumpy, overly cheerful, or just deeply confused, there was a shirt that said it for you. And if you were really committed, you matched it with short shorts and tube socks. That was your whole personality right there. You did not check the clock. You did not get a text. You just rode your bike until the sky turned gold and the streetlights flickered on. That was your cue. That meant it was time to go home, not because someone told you, but because everyone knew. The streetlights were our universal signal. You and your friends pedaled through neighborhoods like you owned them, making up games, racing down hills, jumping curbs. No helmets, no trackers, no supervision. Just you, your bike, and the world. The sound of tires crunching gravel and your own breath was the soundtrack, and sometimes you went too far. A few blocks past where you were allowed. You lost track of time. But the second that first streetlight blinked on, your stomach flipped. Time to book it. You could hear your mom's voice in your head before she even called for you. "Where have you been?" Bikes meant freedom, but the streetlights, they meant consequences. You remember cutting through a shortcut to get home faster. You remember the thrill of beating the dark by seconds. And if you ever pedaled harder because you knew the lights were watching, you remember this. Pet rocks were the most absurd, brilliant, and completely sincere product of the 1970s. Imagine walking into a store and buying a rock. Not a toy that looked like a rock, an actual rock. And not just that, your new pet came in a box with straw bedding and a care manual. In a world spiraling through inflation, war, and cultural tension, Americans collectively decided to laugh. And they laughed by adopting a rock. The genius was not the object, but the moment. It was a wink to consumerism, a joke played perfectly straight. And yet, for some children, it became real. It was the kind of gag that somehow turned genuine, because it gave kids something stable in a world that felt anything but. For some families, it was the only pet they could afford. They named their rocks. They brought them to school. They carried them in pockets like loyal companions. Pet rocks sold by the millions. For a few dollars, you bought not just the item, but the idea that maybe life did not need to be so serious. Maybe in a world of chaos, you could still find control in something that literally never moved. They vanished as quickly as they arrived, leaving behind nothing but confused memories and collectors with original boxes. Why did something so silly feel like the most comforting purchase of the decade? Madonna was not just a pop star, she was a cultural earthquake in stilettos. With every music video, every outfit, every defiant stare into the camera, she redefined what it meant to be a woman on stage. Like a Virgin was not just a song, it was a dare, a challenge to tradition, a celebration of contradiction. She was innocence and provocation, lace gloves and rosaries, punk attitude and disco flair. No one looked like her. No one acted like her. And that was the point. In a world trying to box in femininity, Madonna kicked the walls down in heels. She made fashion dangerous again. Layered bracelets, teased hair, oversized crucifixes. Suddenly, teen girls everywhere were dressing like her, talking like her, being her. Her fashion was not an accessory to her music. It was the message: be bold, be loud, be unapologetically you. She did not just influence trends, she created blueprints. And behind the sequins and fishnets was something deeper. The idea that pop could be powerful, that glam could be gritty, and that no one had to ask permission to be seen. Madonna turned rebellion into runway. She gave attitude a soundtrack. And for anyone growing up in the 80s, she was proof that being different could make you unforgettable. Sesame Street was not just a television show. It was the first place where kids saw their world reflected back in bright colors and warm voices. Premiering in 1969 but defining childhood through the 1970s, it took learning and made it joyful, silly, and deeply human. The show blended puppets with real people, laughter with lessons, and music with meaning. Where else could you find a giant yellow bird, a grumpy green trash can dweller, and a count who taught you math by laughing? For kids growing up in uncertain times, Sesame Street was a steady friend. It taught numbers and letters, sure, but it also taught kindness, empathy, and how to exist in a world full of different faces and feelings. It was playful, but it never talked down to you. It made you feel smart, capable, seen. And in a world where grown-ups often brushed kids aside, Sesame Street looked you in the eyes and said, "You matter." It made television personal. It turned characters like Elmo, Cookie Monster, and Grover into lifelong companions. And it was not afraid to get serious, talking about loss, identity, and family in ways that stuck. For an entire generation, learning started not in school, but on a stoop at 123 Sesame Street. There was a time when your family doctor could look you in the eye, puff on a menthol cigarette, and say, "This one is smooth on the throat." That time was the 1970s. Cigarette companies ran ads with actors in lab coats or real physicians talking about how cool, refreshing, and mild certain brands were. 4 out of 5 doctors allegedly recommended them. You could open a magazine and see a smiling dentist lighting up. Hospitals had smoking lounges, ashtrays sat in waiting rooms, and no one batted an eye. Some commercials even claimed their brand caused less coughing or helped digestion. Yes, really. Kids watching those ads grew up thinking smoking was practically healthy. If your doctor said it was fine, it had to be, right? It was not just marketing, it was medicine, with a lighter. Looking back, it is surreal. But in that moment, it was normal. Comforting even. The science was still catching up, but the style was already there. These ads did not just sell tobacco, they sold trust. And that made them some of the most quietly disturbing moments in television history. We laughed at them later, but in the 1970s, we nodded along. Click. Whir. And there it was, your photo, sliding out of the bottom of a Polaroid camera like a little miracle. You did not know yet if it was good or blurry or had someone blinking. You just knew to shake it, not because it actually helped, but because everyone did. Waiting for that square to develop felt like magic. You watched as faces appeared out of gray fog, smiles, sunlight, the background you forgot about. It all slowly came into focus. Sometimes the picture turned out weird, sometimes it was perfect. But either way, it was one of one. You could not delete it. You could not take 30 more until one looked right. You just got what you got. You wrote on the bottom with a pen, the date, a joke, a name. Then you tucked it into a photo album with sticky pages and crinkled plastic overlays. Those albums lived on living room shelves and in closets filled with birthdays, road trips, first days of school. You flipped through them like time machines. Every page was a portal. You saw your younger self, your weird haircut, your friend who moved away, the outfits, the colors, the furniture. They all came back in an instant. And when family visited, someone always pulled out the album. People pointed, laughed, told stories. It was never quiet. That album held more than photos. It held proof that you were there, that it happened, that you lived it. You remember this. Shag carpeting was not just floor covering. It was a lifestyle choice. You did not walk across it, you sank into it. It came in colors no one had ever seen in nature. Burnt orange, mustard yellow, electric blue. And it stretched wall to wall, daring you to find the floor beneath. Every house in the 1970s seemed to have it, and every child seemed to lose at least one toy inside it. It muffled footsteps. It held warmth. It made every room feel like a sunken lounge. Lying down on Shag was like being hugged by the room itself. It made even silence feel plush. But Shag had a downside. It trapped dust. It collected everything. It was impossible to clean. And yet, for all that, it felt luxurious. Decadent, soft under bare feet during cartoons and cereal mornings. It was carpeting with an opinion. Now we look back and laugh at it. But once, it was a dream realized in fabric form. Why did we trade comfort that bold for floors that whisper and forget? The future did not arrive with a bang. It arrived in a beige plastic box that hummed quietly on a desk in the corner of your house. The Commodore 64, the Apple Macintosh. These were not just machines. They were portals into something entirely new. You typed, and the screen listened. You clicked, and doors opened. At first, it was simple. Word processors, floppy disks, a little green cursor blinking like it had a secret. But quickly, it became more. Games, learning, possibility. For kids, it was a playground. For parents, a tool. For dreamers, a revolution. It changed homework. It changed jobs. It changed you. That blinking cursor? It whispered that anything was possible. Families gathered around, just trying to figure it out together. The sound of a printer was like the future on paper. And the internet? Still a myth. Still a whisper. But you felt it coming. With every boot-up chime, every pixelated game, every painstaking keystroke, you were stepping into a new world. Personal computers did not just change technology. They changed lives. And for the first time ever, the future was not in a sci-fi movie. It was sitting on your desk. Barbie in the 1970s was more than plastic. She was a portal, a way to imagine what life could look like if the world were just a little more pink, a little more perfect. Kids did not just play with Barbie, they lived with her. She had outfits for every occasion. Dream houses with elevators, cars with glittering wheels. She could be a doctor, an astronaut, a fashion model, a veterinarian, all before you had even picked a major. Her world was one where nothing felt too big to dream. And for a generation of girls, and more than a few boys, Barbie was proof that you could be glamorous and powerful at the same time. You could give her stories, drama, triumph, romance, heartbreak. You could change her hair, swap her clothes, reinvent her life in one afternoon. Barbie taught kids to narrate, to imagine, to believe that reinvention was normal. And even when her legs got loose or her hair went frizzy, you still loved her because she had been there. She had danced across your carpet, ridden in your bike basket, and laid beside you on nights you were too afraid to sleep alone. Barbie was never just a doll. She was you, just with a better wardrobe. Buy a ring, slip it on your finger, and learn the secrets of your soul. At least that is what the ads promised. Mood rings in the 1970s were not just novelty jewelry. They were emotion detectors. Feeling sad, blue, excited, purple, annoyed that your brother stole your 8-track tape? Green, apparently. These little thermochromic miracles changed color with your body temperature and had entire decoding charts to interpret their meaning. Kids wore them like emotional badges. Grown-ups wore them to parties. Some people even based relationship decisions on their mood ring's hue. He says he loves me, but his ring turned brown. No one stopped to ask whether finger heat was really the key to our deepest feelings. It just felt true. It was science and magic and fashion, all rolled into one $3 accessory. Teachers had to tell students to stop checking their mood rings mid-quiz. Everyone thought theirs was broken if it turned black, and panicked appropriately. And sure, in hindsight, they were just cheap metal bands with heat-sensitive goo inside. But for a while, they gave us a reason to look at our hands and say, "Wow, I guess I am relaxed." That kind of power was priceless. If you were stuck somewhere and out of change, you had one option: call collect. Payphones were your last resort lifeline. You dialed the operator, gave them your name, and hoped the person on the other end accepted the charges. Sometimes, though, you got clever. Will you accept a call from mom, come pick me up at the mall? Click. Call denied. Message received. You had to memorize that trick. It saved your parents a few coins and saved you a whole lot of trouble. Payphones were everywhere. In malls, on corners, at gas stations. You could smell the cold metal and hear the dial tone just by thinking about it. The coin slot was always a little sticky. The receiver was heavy, sometimes cracked. But when it worked, it worked. You stood there in the open, trying to have a private conversation in public. Rain, wind, noise, it did not matter. That was your phone booth, and you made it work. Your voice echoed off tiled walls, and every conversation had a hum behind it, like the machine itself was listening. That moment, standing alone with your backpack at your feet, was its own kind of growing up. If your parents heard that AT&T collect call operator voice, they knew what was coming. And when they picked up anyway, you felt saved. Calling collect was not glamorous, but it was yours. You remember this. Disco Demolition Night was not just a publicity stunt, it was a riot disguised as a baseball promotion. What began as a radio gag to blow up disco records in the middle of a Chicago White Sox game turned into chaos. Thousands stormed the field, fires burned, bats were stolen, the game was forfeited. But what happened that night was deeper than music. It was the sound of backlash. A backlash against disco, yes, but also against the communities that loved it. Against change, against color, against joy. Disco represented liberation. Gay clubs, black voices, women on the dance floor owning the beat. And in the summer of 1979, that scared some people. It was not just music under attack, it was people. The explosion on the field was a signal that joy had become too loud for some to tolerate. The explosion at Comiskey Park was not just about vinyl. It was about fear disguised as fun. The night left a crater, literal and cultural. Within a year, disco was pronounced dead. Radio stations changed formats. Record labels turned silent. But disco never died. It went underground. It evolved. It survived. Why do the loudest protests often come from those most afraid of the future? Going to the movies in the 1980s was not just an outing. It was an initiation. You did not just watch Back to the Future. you traveled in time. You did not just see E.T., you believed in aliens, friendship, and flying bikes. The Goonies made treasure hunts seem plausible in your own backyard. Ghostbusters had you checking every closet for slime. These were not just movies, they were portals, promises, and rites of passage. Every frame was burned into memory, every line quoted in playgrounds and lunchrooms. Blockbusters were not about selling tickets, they were about shaping imaginations. They gave us John Williams scores that made hearts race and Spielberg visions that made magic feel real. Crowds lined up outside theaters, popcorn in hand, hearts pounding. Parents, kids, teens, they all came together in the darkness of a movie theater to be transformed. These films were louder, brighter, funnier, and somehow deeper than anything that came before. And when the credits rolled, you did not leave the theater the same person who walked in. You left dreaming, you left changed. The movies of the 1980s did not just entertain a generation, they raised one. Only in the 1970s could a rock become a celebrity. The pet rock craze of 1975 was so absurd it made sense. For just under $4, you could buy a smooth gray stone nestled in a cardboard box with breathing holes and a care manual. It had no eyes, no mouth, no tricks, and kids adored it. Why? Maybe because it was funny, maybe because it was simple, or maybe, deep down, it was because even the most ordinary thing could feel special with enough imagination. Children gave their pet rocks names, personalities, backstories. They were carried in pockets, introduced to friends, given beds made from shoeboxes. Some kids genuinely believed their rock understood them. It never talked back. It never judged. It just was. And in a world of flashing toys and plastic noise, the pet rock was oddly peaceful. A quiet rebellion against doing too much, against always needing more. It reminded kids that anything could be a toy if you loved it enough. The pet rock was not a gimmick. It was a mirror. It showed how much kids could create out of nothing. And somehow, that silly little stone became one of the most unforgettable fads in history. There was no escaping them. Leisure suits were everywhere, and not just on disco floors. Picture this: a grown man, chest hair gleaming under gold chains, sweating through a double-knit polyester jacket in full sunlight. This was not just fashion. It was a national movement. The jacket matched the pants, and sometimes even the shirt. You were not just going out, you were making a statement. And that statement was, "I am incredibly flammable but undeniably groovy." Most came in pastel shades like avocado green, mustard yellow, or burnt orange, making the wearer look like a couch from a dentist's waiting room. But that did not matter. If you owned one, you strutted like Travolta, even if you walked like your Uncle Stan. These suits did not breathe. They trapped heat like a greenhouse, and yet people wore them everywhere, from weddings to Wednesday night bowling. If you were really bold, you paired it with platform shoes and a gold-plated belt buckle big enough to pick up radio signals. The leisure suit was the 1970s in clothing form. Loud, synthetic, and deeply committed to the bit. It was a time when fashion said, "Function? Never heard of her." And somehow, we pulled it off. Burning a CD felt like power. You could make your own album, your own playlist, your own little world on a disc. All you needed was a computer, a stack of blank CDs, and the right software. You picked your songs carefully. Maybe they were all upbeat. Maybe they were sad. Maybe they told a story only you understood. You clicked burn, watched the little progress bar, waited, and hoped it did not fail at 99%. When it finished, you scribbled a title on it with a Sharpie. Road Trip Mix. Summer 2003. Songs for Sam. You popped it into your stereo or Walkman, hit play, and listened to the future you just made. If you were really serious, you kept them all in a giant CD tower, alphabetized, color-coded, organized like a personal archive. Guests came over, flipped through your collection, and judged you accordingly. You have 3 Avril Lavigne albums? No, I have 4. CD towers were more than shelves. They were statements, testaments. You curated your life one disc at a time. You remember this. Wood paneling was the heartbeat of 1970s interior design. Thick, dark slabs lined walls from floor to ceiling, turning dens and basements into cabins, even if you were 3 miles from the nearest tree. It was not about brightness. It was about mood. Homes felt earthy, lived in, safe. You could sit against it, lean back, and feel like you were somewhere older, warmer, and far from the buzzing world outside. Wood paneling was in rec rooms, behind television sets, next to ceramic owls and beanbag chairs. There was a hush to those rooms, like they swallowed noise and kept secrets. Even the creaks in the floor sounded softer next to those dark wood walls. It became the backdrop to childhoods, to birthdays, to tired parents sipping instant coffee on padded bar stools. Over time, people painted over it, ripped it down, called it outdated. But the feeling stayed, the nostalgia, the smell, that unique acoustics of a room where every wall softened the sound. It was not fancy, it was not minimalist, but it was home. Why did we trade such warmth for blank walls and cold white light? If any of these 1980s gems made you smile, drop your favorite forgotten thing in the comments, give this video a like you are slamming the VCR shut, and hit subscribe so you never miss another blast of memory straight from the good old days.